Nigeria sits on the largest natural gas reserves in Africa, 200 trillion cubic feet, and for decades the country has watched a fortune quite literally burn into the sky.
Fires like these burn throughout Nigeria's oil-rich delta. Oil companies still find it more convenient to burn away the gas, even though it could be used to generate electricity.
A nation practically drowning in energy and still can't make affordable fertilizer available to its farmers, still can't keep the lights on because the power plants that run on this exact gas barely have enough of it. It makes zero sense, right? So a few years ago, an attempt was made by Nigeria to fix it.
This is the site of the $20 billion Ogidigben Gas Revolution Industrial Park. The groundbreaking ceremony was done by former President Goodluck Jonathan in March 2015.
They didn't just want to build another pipeline or export dock to ship the wealth away. They wanted to build this, a massive multi-billion-dollar gas city, a sprawling industrial metropolis that would take the raw gas and turn it into a literal building blocks of modern superpower. The ground was broken, the speeches were made, then for nearly 10 years absolutely nothing. The investment never arrived and everything went back to nothing. The whole project became a ghost story and some people even call it proud.
We urge the federal government to immediately put in place processes that will start the Gas Revolution Industrial Park, Ogidigben. If these demands are not considered, we shut down all oil and gas operations in our homeland.
Until a single signature in a boardroom in China changed everything. Suddenly, in 2025, this forgotten area became the single biggest China Belt and Road construction commitment announced anywhere in the world that year. Overnight, it turned Nigeria into one of China's largest industrial beds in Africa. Today, we are taking a closer look at Nigeria's Niger Delta to understand how a global power struggle is trying to bring Africa's largest plant gas city back to life, and whether it can finally become a reality. So here is the planet at night, and you can basically read the world map just by looking at who has lights on. Europe lit up, North America lit up, but when you come down here to West Africa, it gets dark, really dark, except for this. These aren't cities, these are fires. This is what's called gas flaring. When companies drill for crude oil in this part of Nigeria, natural gas comes up with it. It is a byproduct, and for decades, because there weren't enough pipelines or processing plants to handle it, they just burn it off, exposed flamed 24 hours a day right here in the swamp. And here is where the story gets strange, because Nigeria isn't some gas-poor country making do with scraps. Nigeria holds the 9th largest proven natural gas reserves on earth, 209 trillion cubic feet. That is an enormous amount of energy sitting on the ground. That kind of gas should mean cheap electricity, it should mean fertilizer plant, petrochemical factories, industrial jobs. It should mean this country doesn't need to depend on anyone for basics. But instead, for 50 years, Nigeria was burning its own gas into the sky while spending hard currency to import the exact product you make from gas. The same gas, just bought from somebody else. Sit with that for a second. One side of the country is literally touching fuel into the sky. The other side is writing checks to bring the same fuel back in, processed at a much higher price. So a few years ago, the state oil company, the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, or NNPCL, asked what sounds like a simple question. What if we stop wasting so much gas, use more of it here at home, and build the factories ourselves? They called it the gas revolution. To make it real, they picked one specific location to build an industrial complex big enough to change how Nigeria's entire economy works. But here is the thing, the spot they chose sits on top of a history that makes this whole project a lot more complicated than just laying pipe and pouring concrete. So if you are NNPC and you've just committed to building the biggest gas processing zone in the country's history, the first question is obvious: where do you put it? they chose here, a place called Ogidigben. And when you look at why, purely from engineering standpoint, you start to understand the logic immediately. Look at what's already here. Less than a kilometer away, right there, sits a massive operation base run by Chevron, the American oil giant. They have been operating in this exact stretch of Delta for decades. The infrastructure already exists. And right off this coast, sitting under the seabed, a gas field holding around 18 trillion cubic feet of reserves. That's the feedstock. That's what the whole project runs on, and it's right there. Then there is this, the Escravos-Lagos pipeline, the single most important gas pipeline in the country. It runs right past the site. So you've got the gas on the ground, the processing base next door, and the pipeline to move the finished product already in place. From a planning perspective, this is about as good as it gets. But this isn't just a gas plant. Look at the size of what they plan. 2,700 hectares, around 5,000 football pitches, and they weren't filling it with one thing. Power plant feeding electricity into the national grid, fertilizer units replacing the import Nigeria has been paying for with hard currency, a petrochemical hub making plastics and methanol, even an aluminium smelter, one of the most energy-hungry industry on earth. Because when you are sitting on gas this cheap, you can afford to run one. And then at the edge, a deep water port to ship the finished product out, not raw gas, finished product. And to make the economies even more aggressive, the government designated the whole site a free trade zone, zero tariffs, tax-free operations. The pitch was essentially, why would the manufacturers set up in Dubai when they could set up right here, right on top of the raw materials and pay nothing? The developers started calling it Africa's largest gas city. The blueprint was arguably the most complete plan for industrial self-sufficiency the continent had produced. On paper, it was perfect, but paper doesn't have to survive the Niger Delta. This is the part of the story that a lot of international investors like to gloss over. The Niger Delta is not an empty wilderness. It is a highly contested, deeply complex home to different ethnic nations who have been left out of the oil wealth for half a century. Ogidigben is an Isekiri community, but the land surrounding the proposed deepwater port has long been claimed by both Isekiri and Ijaw communities. In the Niger Delta, where oil has shaped politics, identity, and power for generations, those competing claims turned what looked like an engineering project into a political minefield. In 2014, the bulldozers actually showed up. They piled sand, they cleared the swamp. The president comes out for a grand ribbon cutting ceremony. And then the project hits a brick wall. The community dispute turned explosive. Armed groups blocked the gates. Foreign investors from Saudi Arabia looked at the security risks, looked at the local strongmen, and said, nope, we're out. For nearly a decade, the site sat completely silent. The dredged channels filled back up with mud, the survey markers rusted in rain. In the Nigerian press, the people started calling it a ghost story. It became a classic example of how mega projects can fail. They had the gas, they had the land, but they overlooked the biggest challenge in the Delta. It wasn't building pipeline, it was earning people's trust, until a group of politicians in Abuja decided to look east. By late 2022, Nigeria was desperate to bring this project back from the dead. They set up new committees, brought local governors to the table and tried to fix the politics. But they still needed money, and they needed someone bold enough to build in the swamp. Enter China. In January 2025, a major development agreement was signed that completely changed the direction of the project. It brought together Nigerian investors, Emirati investors, and China's state-owned engineering giant CNCEC around a plan to finally turn the gas revolution industrial park into reality. On one side, you have Emirati investors helping structure the project's financial backing. In the middle is China's state-owned engineering giant, and on the other side, Nigeria's role is to provide the land, the gas, the regulatory support, and the enabling environment needed to make the project work. For Nigeria, the logic is incredibly clean. We give you the fuel we've been burning away, and you take the massive financial risks of building the city. Now, this is where this story stops being a local Nigerian issue and becomes a massive story about global geopolitics. Look at this data. In 2024, Nigeria was a relatively minor player in China's global infrastructure lending program, the Belt and the Road Initiative. In 2025, that number skyrocketed to nearly $25 billion, and almost all of that massive surge comes down to one single contract, the Ogidigben gas city. According to researchers tracking Chinese overseas lending, this single project made Nigeria the #1 destination for Chinese belt and road construction on earth, ahead of every other country. But it's what they are funding that matters. For 20 years, China loaned money to Africa to build railways, roads, ports, things that move raw materials out of Africa. Ogidigben is a total shift in strategy. This is Chinese money building high-tech factories inside Africa to process African resources for Africans before anything gets exported. It is a massive macroeconomic pivot. But a $20 billion signature in Beijing is still a long way from a factory rising out of the ground. This is where I have to step back from the hype and look at raw reality, because we have seen this before. Yes, the political alignment right now is stronger than it has ever been. You have the president, the Delta governor, Dubai capital, and the sheer geopolitical weight of Beijing all pushing in the same direction. But the underlying friction that killed this project 10 years ago didn't just vanish. The communities living around these gates are still waiting to see if they are going to get a piece of the pie or just more polluted water. If they feel left out again, they can shut this entire project down with a single protest. If you stand on the shores of Ogidigben today, the stakes are staring you right in the face. You can still see the channel cut into the earth a decade ago, a monument to an ambition that ran out of steam. Nigeria has the fuel, it has the location, it has the builder, and it finally has the money. Now it just has to answer the one question it has been burning into the sky for 30 years. Can it finally keep its own fortune at home? If you love definitive African infrastructure projects like this, please like and subscribe, and let me know in the comment section what you think about this project. See you on the next one.